For joining me for this video here on St. Thomas Aquinas for Everyone. I'm Dave Palmer, and this video has to do with a conversation I had with some of the students that I teach, high school students I teach the Summa Theologica for, and we got into a discussion about God's power and what God is able to do, what God isn't able to do. And I mentioned to them that St. Thomas Aquinas teaches in the Summa about whether or not basically God has the power to erase the past, something that happened in the past. I told them what St. Thomas Aquinas taught, and they were very surprised by that. So I thought I'd make a video about it and explain this to you to see if this makes sense to you and whether or not you agree with St. Thomas Aquinas in the conclusion that he comes to. So this really has to do with God's power. There is a question with about, I think, 5 or 6 articles at the beginning of the Summa and Prima Pars about God's power. It comes in the section of God's will, God's knowledge, right after his attributes, like he's infinite and eternal and simple and good and perfect, those kind of things. In one, okay, God's power. And so when we talk about God's power, we typically think of it in terms of things that we think of being powerful, like being able to lift weights, or even, the power of, crushing something or having a lot of force behind us. And then, of course, when it comes to God, we see his power in the created world through things like powerful lightning and tornadoes and hurricanes and tsunamis, right? Ice storms. We see the power of God just in nature, right? And so where does God's power begin and end, and what can he do, what can't he do? And so that's basically what we're getting at in this question in the Summa. Before we get to whether or not God can erase the past or make what happened not happened, let's look at this article in the Summa where St. Thomas Aquinas, under the power of God, says whether the power of God is infinite. Okay, infinite means no bounds. It just kind of goes on forever, right? And you may not be too surprised that Thomas says, yes, God's power is infinite. Active power exists in God according to the measure in which he is actual. Now, his existence is infinite inasmuch as it is not limited by anything that receives it. Wherefore it is necessary that the active power in God should be infinite. For in every agent is found that the more perfectly an agent has the form by which it acts, the greater its power to act. For instance, the hotter a thing is, the greater the power has it to give heat, and it would have infinite power to give heat were its own heat infinite. Okay, I think that makes sense. I love the practical examples that St. Thomas uses in the Summa Theologica. Whence, since the divine essence through which God acts is infinite, it follows that his power likewise is infinite. Okay, so really no limitations on God's power. But then we get to this next question that he asks, and this is where it gets a little bit tricky. He says whether God can make the past not to have been. And this is what kind of throws people off. So let's say, for example, this guy woke up this morning and had a breakfast of, so it looks like some croissants and coffee and orange juice, maybe a yogurt parfait. And that happened, okay? He woke up at 7 o'clock. By 7:30, he's eating his breakfast. And then by 8 o'clock, he's done. So the question is, can God go back and make such that that never happened in the first place? So basically what we're asking is, can God erase it? And so instead of doing that, the guy woke up and he didn't have the breakfast, even though he did, but God has erased it, right? So Thomas asks in the same section, the Summa, whether God can make the past not to have been. And this is how he comes down on it. He says, there does not fall under the scope of God's omnipotence anything that implies a contradiction. Now, that the past should not have been implies a contradiction. For as it implies a contradiction to say that Socrates is sitting and not sitting, so does it say that he sat and he did not sit. Or to use our example, he ate breakfast and he didn't eat breakfast, right? But to say that he did sit is to say that it happened in the past. So to say that he did not sit is to say that it did not happen, whence that the past should not have been does not come under the scope of divine power. Isn't it interesting? Okay, so he says, this is what Augustine means when he says, Whosoever says, if God is almighty, let him make what is done as if it were not done, does not see that that is to say, if God is almighty, let him effect that which is true by the very fact that it is true be false. And the philosopher Aristotle says, of this one thing alone, God is deprived, namely to make undone the things that have been done. All right, so God has infinite power. God can do whatever he wants, but he cannot contradict himself. He can't make a four-sided triangle, and apparently he cannot go back and make what has happened not happen, because that would be a contradiction, because it did happen. Okay. All right. Hope you enjoyed that. Let me know if that makes sense. Comment and share and like and all that good stuff. And we'll have more videos coming here on St. Thomas Aquinas for everyone. God bless you.